In 1974, inside a small art gallery in Naples, Italy, a woman stood completely still for 6 hours, letting a crowd do whatever they wanted with her. Next to her stood a table. On it, there were 72 simple objects. Some were comforting, like a rose, a feather, some perfume, but others were quite the opposite. These included things like a knife, scissors, a gun, and a bullet. There were no instructions for the audience, except one. They all had 6 hours to use the objects on her as they pleased. What happened next revealed one of the most shocking aspects of our human nature that most of us would rather not believe. This was Rhythm Zero, an art performance that nearly ended in murder. Many people thought Marina Abramović was deranged. As a young woman, she often pushed the boundaries of physical and psychological endurance, and she tested the limits of human experience through sacrifice, vulnerability, and pain. In what was then Yugoslavia, she was born in 1946 to parents who were decorated Communist Party officials. Naturally, her childhood was strict, cold, and highly disciplined, shaping her in a secularist, materialist view. But, on the other hand, her grandmother was devoutly Serbian Orthodox, instilling Marina with spiritual values as well. It was from this contradiction that came an obsession, the spiritual nature of suffering. Between 1973 and 1974, Marina began a series of performance pieces that she called rhythms. Each piece tested her body, her mind, and her threshold for pain. In Rhythm 2, she took pills prescribed to psychotic patients to simulate a breakdown. In Rhythm 5, she lay inside a burning star until she lost consciousness from smoke inhalation. In Rhythm 10, she stabbed between her fingers with a knife until she drew blood. But the final piece of the series would be the most extreme. It would essentially reverse the formula. This time, the pain wouldn't come from within. It would come from people on the outside. She would become the passive object, and the audience would become active in imposing pain. Here, she would discover just how far they were willing to go. At precisely 8 p.m., Marina Abramović stood in the middle of the gallery. She was dressed plainly. She did not speak. She did not move. She did not even make eye contact. But, in her own words, she said, "I am the object. During this time, I take full responsibility." For the first 2 hours, the crowd was hesitant. Viewers, unsure whether this was performance or provocation, circled her cautiously. Some placed a rose in her hand. Another kissed her cheek. A few moved her posture gently, shifting her like a mannequin. But, eventually, things escalated. By the 3rd hour, someone had cut off her shirt with a razor. Others followed, and soon her clothes were in tatters. Someone even cut her neck deeply enough to draw blood. Then they proceeded to drink it. Various people touched her inappropriately. Thorns from the rose were pressed into her stomach. But it didn't stop there. A man picked up the gun from the table and loaded it with a bullet. He then placed the weapon in Marina's hand, positioned it at her head, and wrapped her own finger around the trigger, slowly putting more and more pressure. Still, she didn't flinch, as that would contradict the whole point of the performance. Meanwhile, a fight had broken out between different factions of the audience, as some tried to wrestle the gun away. They essentially divided themselves in 2 groups, those that didn't want to harm Marina, and those that did. This sudden polarization wasn't random. It was the result of a powerful psychological shift taking place inside the room, a live demonstration of de-individuation. The performance quite literally paralleled infamous experiments like the Stanford Prison Experiment and Milgram's obedience study. In those experiments, ordinary people who were given roles and instructions committed acts that they never thought themselves capable of. In the realm of psychology, it's well known that while in groups, individuals can lose their sense of self-awareness. Accountability dissolves, empathy fades. Surrounded by others, your identity merges into a collective, one capable of cruelty under the right conditions. Here, you don't feel guilty for your actions, because now, your actions are no longer yours alone. With no clear rules, no punishment, and no consequences in Rhythm Zero, the audience had defaulted to violence because it became normalized as time passed. Psychologists call this informational social influence. This is where, in ambiguous situations, people look to others to determine the correct behavior and simply follow. The real horror of Rhythm Zero, though, wasn't that people committed violence. It was how easily they slipped into it. There was no explicit reward, nor were there any conditions, only an opportunity. After 6 hours, when Marina simply took a step forward, literally reclaiming her personhood, the crowd suddenly fled. It was as though a spell had been broken, and with it came a flood of recognition. The audience could no longer pretend. They were no longer interacting with just an object. After the audience had touched her, cut her, stripped her, they simply ran away, unable to face what they'd done. Each one of them had suddenly regained their sense of individuality, and, when faced with the prospect of a confrontation, chose to escape. Later, Marina reflected on this chilling moment, saying, "If you leave it up to the audience, they can kill you." It's worth noting, Marina Abramović wasn't the first to test the morality of a crowd. A decade earlier, in 1964, Yoko Ono did a similar performance, one that was called Cut Piece. She'd walked onto a stage in Kyoto, Japan, dressed modestly. She said nothing. She simply knelt down, placed a pair of scissors in front of her, and waited. One by one, people began to cut away pieces of her clothing. They snipped just the edges, small, polite cuts. But as time passed, their hesitation faded. The cuts grew deeper and more unhinged. Strangers began cutting away parts of her bra, her skirt, until eventually there was nearly nothing left to remove. Throughout all of this, Yoko didn't protest once. And in that silence, there was a kind of accusation. Much like Rhythm Zero, Cut Piece wasn't about a spectacle. It was about exposing human nature. Both Yoko and Marina placed their bodies into the hands of the audience, and both asked, "What would you do if no one stopped you?" Unsurprisingly, both received the same response. Marina Abramovic's case was, personally, a very hard read. Not because of the physical violence, but because it shows just how thin the line is between empathy and apathy. What's terrifying isn't just that people inflicted harm. It's how easily they convinced themselves it was acceptable. And these same people could be people we're around every day. Even worse, it could be our own selves. Today, Rhythm Zero is regarded as one of the most powerful performance pieces in art history, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. It makes us think about what we're really capable of when the rules are removed. It also resonates now, in the 21st century, more than ever. In an age of internet anonymity, groupthink, and outrage mobs, de-individuation isn't just some far-removed phenomenon. No, it's online, it's cultural, and it's political. Rhythm Zero was a warning to everyone. It was a warning that violence thrives when thinking for yourself stops. Yes, Marina Abramović survived Rhythm Zero, but it still changed her completely. She later admitted the experience aged her. Gray hair began appearing in her 20s, she claimed, after the performance. And it's not hard to see why. Yet still, despite all of this, she continued her performances. Nonetheless, out of all her art pieces, Rhythm Zero still remains one of the most chilling works in the history of performance art.